So the last thing we'll discuss with our pre-surgery preparation is going to be getting out and practicing. You've already shook out your gear and you've already identified where and how you're going to carry your spare magazines. The next step is going to be to get out and actually practice this. Practice it dry and practice it live so that once you go to your post-surgery recovery, you're not trying to fumble around and figure things out. You want that myelination, or that muscle memory as we call it, to begin well before you actually need the skills. Now in this video, we're not going to be doing that typical cold bore tactical deep dive into the techniques. There'll be a separate video, I'll link it down below, that will cover all the nuances of one-handed shooting techniques. But for now, we're just going to hit the highlights as it relates to preparation and execution of post-surgery carry. Now we're going to discuss a couple of different options for getting that gun loaded. The technique that I would offer up will likely enable you to retain that master grip on your strong side hand, will be to hook your rear sight or optic on something on your body. For example, I'm going to hook this optic on my belt or holster, and I'm going to push just enough to release the slide lock and let it go into battery. In doing this, you must absolutely maintain trigger finger discipline and muzzle awareness. We're not pointing that gun at anything we're not willing to blow off, and our finger must be high indexed on the frame or the slide. Those things are non-negotiable, and they do not change from our normal daily carry. Once the slide is forward, you're still going to look at the holster, make sure it's clear of any obstructions, and watch as the gun goes back into the holster, making absolutely sure there's no garments or anything that's going to hook into the trigger guard and activate that trigger, because that will be no bueno. All right, so now we have our spare magazines stowed in the pouch. Now we want to have that other magazine that goes into the gun. We're going to start with the gun, likely with the slide closed. We want to lock that slide to the rear. To do this, you have a few options. If your gun has an ambidextrous slide lock, then you can actually use the side of the knuckle on your strong side trigger finger and push up while retracting the slide by hooking the rear sight or your optic on something. Here I'm going to demonstrate using my belt, force the slide open while simultaneously pushing up on the slide lock. Once the slide is locked to the rear, we're going to look at that holster and holster the gun using the magazine that's going to go in the gun. Again, I'm going to use my index finger on the spine of the magazine. I'm going to look down at the mag well, push it in till it seats, get a good grasp or grip on the gun. Make sure you have a safe backstop, and we're going to hook the rear sight or the optic on something and retract the slide just far enough for the slide lock mechanism to release. Now you have a round in the chamber and your magazine is full. Now we're going to look at the holster, make sure it's clear, there's nothing that's going to activate the trigger, and we're going to safely holster. All right, so that's how to load the gun if the slide is locked to the rear while it's in your holster. Now let's discuss if the slide is forward. If you're doing a tactical reload, or if your holster does not accommodate inserting the gun with the slide locked open, then you may need to do this. Let's go ahead, look at the holster and reholster the gun. When we secure that magazine, we're still going to have our index finger on the back of it. We're going to look down at the mag well, let it guide it on in. Now here is a consideration, is that because the slide is forward, you're not going to be able to just slide that magazine in and have it locked securely. The reason for this is that top round on the magazine is hitting the bottom of the slide inside the gun. You're having to compress that spring that's below the follower ever so much more. So here's a technique to ensure you get a good solid securing of the mag in the mag well. We're still going to have our index finger indexed on the back of the magazine since it's a one-handed reload. We're going to look down, guide it on in, but once we get the mag into the mag well, we're now going to hook the sides of the grip panel of the gun, and we're going to push the base plate of the magazine in until it securely locks using the palm of our hand. Once it is secure, you can go ahead and give it a little tug to ensure it is locked into place. However, if you're doing this defensively, those milliseconds are probably going to count, so make sure that you have that claw technique nice and refined so you're not having to tug on stuff, because you still may have to rack that slide to ensure there's a round in the chamber. Once we have that mag secured into the mag well and it's locked into place, get that good solid master grip. When the gun comes out, if it was a tactical reload, then you're ready to present back out and engage. If, however, it is an empty chamber, you're still going to have to hook that rear sight or your optic on something to rack the slide. Now, here's where we're going to be very mindful to rack it fully so you don't short stroke to where it just cocks the action and you think it's going to have a round in the chamber, but you in fact didn't cycle it fully enough to load that next round. Now you're ready to get back into the fight or look at your holster and holster. Now let's talk about how to safely unload and clear that handgun with one hand. Using your thumb, you're going to reach around, activate the mag release, pull that mag out and secure it. Maintaining good trigger finger discipline and muzzle awareness. Get a good grip on the gun, pull it on out. We need to lock that slide to the rear. To manipulate the slide lock, if you have an ambidextrous control, you can use the knuckle of your trigger finger and press up while that slide is retracting. If you do not, then you're going to need to use your thumb to push up on the slide lock. Just as before, we're going to hook that rear sight or that optic on something and push onto the gun to cycle the slide and lock it to the rear. Point of consideration here is we're likely going to generate less force against that slide when we're racking it against our body or some object. So you need to make sure you're very diligent and you actually observe the chamber to make sure that that round has extracted when we're doing our 3-point check. So get a good grip on the gun. I'm going to take and hook it and make sure we do our 3-point check. The chamber's clear, the magazine is clear, the gun is clear. Then we can let that slide go back forward and reholster the gun. Or we can take and put our self-defense ammo back in the gun if we are doing this as we're leaving the range. So now let's hit the highlights of reloading techniques using only one hand. Same as always, our finger will come off the trigger and we're going to bring that elbow back here into our rib cage so it's indexing in a consistent place every single time. Normally I'll teach you to trace the frame and the slide with your support side thumb, bringing it back, dropping that magazine en route so that well before you're cocked into place here in your side, that magazine has already fallen free. Now we've only got one hand, so we're going to use whichever finger is most conducive. If the mag release button is on the same side as our thumb, then go ahead and just use that to drop the magazine. If, however, whatever is your strong side hand after surgery, the mag release button is on the opposite side of your thumb, then either use your trigger finger or for most people, using the middle finger to drop that mag will be easier to access. Once we've got that done, we're going to look at the holster and reholster. Reach across to your spare mag carrier, and same as before, we're going to acquire that magazine, but now our index finger will be indexed on the rear or the spine of the magazine, so that when we look down and use proprioception, it will guide it straight into the mag well. If your slide is locked to the rear at this point, there'll be very little resistance. It'll go straight in and click. We're going to secure that gun, achieve that master grip, and my preferred technique for letting that slide go forward is to hook that rear sight or the optic on something and then let the slide go forward, being very mindful of muzzle orientation and trigger finger discipline so we don't have a negligent discharge. So that is if the slide is locked to the rear when we put it into the holster. Some holsters you won't be able to put the gun in if the slide is locked to the rear. So in those instances, let's discuss how we're going to reload the gun if we must let that slide go forward. Same as before, our finger comes off the trigger, we're going to drop that magazine, and then now before we put the gun into the holster, if our holster won't accommodate holstering with the slide lock to the rear, we let that slide go forward, whichever mean you want to use to let the slide release, put it in the holster, and as we reach across and grab that magazine from the spare pouch, when we put that magazine in order to ensure it gets a good solid seat, because remember at this point that magazine is going to be hitting the bottom of the slide since the slide is forward, and there's greater spring tension because that is a full magazine, so it has to compress the spring in the follower a little bit. So if you just take and put it in, there's a chance it won't actually click when it and seat in there properly. We're going to take and use your middle and ring finger. We're going to hook that onto the side of the grip of the gun, and then using the meaty portion at the base of your palm, we're going to take and push in firmly until it clicks and seats. Now the slide is forward on an empty chamber. Acquire the gun from the holster, getting that good master grip, and then again we're going to rack the slide on something to get that round in the chamber. We can either continue our engagement, or at this point, if there's no further need to engage, we look at the holster and we holster the gun. For the first couple of weeks after surgery, that shoulder was so tender that I didn't even bother putting a spare mag carrier on the belt because it was so tender. I didn't even want to reach over and jerk that shoulder around just to reach that mag. So for pocket carry of that spare magazine in those initial first couple of weeks, again, we're going to take that finger off the trigger. We're going to drop that magazine and holster the gun, reaching into the pocket where that spare mag is at. Remember, for this instance, it's going to be staged in the same side pocket as what your gun hand is. When we retrieve that magazine out of the pocket, ideally we're going to have our index finger on the rear of the magazine, get the mag seated, and then we're going to rack the slide. Everything else is the same as the other discussions. If you found this content to be helpful in your journey towards shoulder surgery and post-recovery carry, then go ahead and hit that like, subscribe, leave a comment down below if you desire. And if there's somebody else in your life who's about to go under the shoulder knife, go ahead and hit that share button and send it to them so they can take a look as well. Until next time, God bless and stay safe.